On September 16, 1992, the United Kingdom faced one of the most significant financial crises in its modern history, a day that would later be remembered as Black Wednesday. What began as a determined effort by the British government to defend the national currency soon turned into a dramatic collapse that exposed the limits of political control over global markets. In the early hours of that morning, confidence within the government and the Bank of England remained relatively strong, as officials believed they possessed enough financial power and policy tools to stabilize the British pound. For years, central banks had successfully intervened in currency markets, and British leaders assumed this situation would be no different. They underestimated the scale of opposition forming among international investors. At the time, Britain was a member of the European exchange rate mechanism, a system designed to keep European currencies trading within narrow bands against one another. While the system aimed to promote stability, it forced Britain to maintain a fixed exchange rate even as its economy struggled with high inflation, weak growth, and rising unemployment. These pressures made the pound increasingly difficult to defend. Global currency traders recognized that the pound was overvalued and vulnerable, and many believed that the British government would eventually be forced to abandon its position. As selling pressure increased, the Bank of England began using its foreign currency reserves to buy pounds in an attempt to support the exchange rate. Each intervention, however, only encouraged traders to sell more aggressively. Among those traders was George Soros, a hedge fund manager already known for his deep understanding of international finance. Soros believed the British government was trapped by its commitment to the ERM, and that defending the pound would become politically and economically impossible. Acting on this belief, his fund placed massive bets against the currency. As the crisis intensified, the government responded by sharply raising interest rates in an effort to make holding the pound more attractive. Rates were increased to 12%, and later officials announced they would rise to 15% if necessary. Instead of restoring confidence, the dramatic move signaled panic and confirmed traders' expectations that the situation was spiraling out of control. By the afternoon, the cost of defending the pound had become unsustainable, and Britain faced a choice between economic damage and public defeat. The government made the historic decision to withdraw from the exchange rate mechanism, allowing the pound to fall freely on the open market. Within hours, years of policy collapsed. The aftermath was severe, as the Bank of England lost billions of pounds, and the government's economic credibility was deeply damaged. George Soros, meanwhile, emerged with profits estimated at around $1 billion. Earning him the lasting title of the man who broke the Bank of England. Black Wednesday ultimately reshaped global financial thinking, proving that even powerful governments could be overwhelmed by market forces. George Soros was born in Budapest, Hungary, in 1930, into a Jewish family that endured the turbulence of World War II and the rise of fascism, experiences that shaped his worldview and his understanding of risk and survival. After the war, he emigrated to England and enrolled at the London School of Economics, where he studied under the philosopher Karl Popper. whose ideas about open societies and critical thinking left a profound mark on him, and would later influence both his financial strategies and his philanthropic work. Soros began his career in finance modestly, working for various merchant banks and investment firms. But he quickly gained a reputation for his analytical mind, his ability to read economic trends, and his willingness to take calculated risks that others avoided. By the 1970s, Soros had moved to the United States and founded his own hedge fund, the Quantum Fund, which became one of the most successful and influential funds in history. His trading style combined rigorous economic analysis with bold speculation, often focusing on currencies, interest rates, and other macroeconomic factors that shaped entire national economies. Unlike many investors who followed conventional strategies, Soros actively sought out situations where financial markets were mispriced or vulnerable to instability, recognizing patterns that others either ignored or underestimated. This approach allowed him to generate enormous profits while also attracting both admiration and controversy. Soros was not only a trader but also a thinker who reflected on the broader impact of financial systems on society. He frequently wrote and spoke about the relationship between markets and politics, emphasizing that financial speculation could both reveal weaknesses in economies and influence policy decisions. By the early 1990s, he had become a figure of immense influence, known for both his wealth and his capacity to move markets with well-timed, large-scale trades. His role in Black Wednesday would cement his reputation as a financial genius, as he identified vulnerabilities in the British pound and acted decisively, ultimately turning a historic crisis into a personal triumph, even beyond this single event. Soros's career is characterized by his combination of intellectual rigor, strategic insight, and fearlessness in the face of risk, traits that allowed him to navigate some of the most complex and volatile markets in modern history. His story illustrates how deep knowledge, careful analysis, and bold action can intersect to create extraordinary outcomes. And it sets the stage for understanding how one man could challenge and ultimately defeat a national financial institution like the Bank of England. Black Wednesday, which occurred on September 16, 1992, was not a sudden accident, but the culmination of growing economic tensions and policy challenges that had been building in the United Kingdom for years. At its core, the crisis revolved around Britain's participation in the European exchange rate mechanism, a system designed to stabilize European currencies by keeping them within strict exchange rate bands relative to one another. The ERM required member countries, including Britain, to maintain their currency's value within a predetermined range, even if domestic economic conditions made that difficult. While the goal was stability, the mechanism placed enormous pressure on nations with weaker economies, forcing them to prioritize currency defense over other domestic economic concerns. By the early 1990s, Britain's economy was under strain. Inflation was high, growth was sluggish, and unemployment had risen to levels that threatened social and political stability. To maintain the pound's position within the ERM, the Bank of England had to take measures that often conflicted with broader economic needs. including artificially high interest rates, which discouraged investment and further slowed growth. These measures were intended to signal strength to international markets, but they also exposed the pound to increasing vulnerability as traders began to question whether Britain could realistically maintain the currency's value. Over the long term, international investors, aware of these structural weaknesses, began to see an opportunity. Unlike domestic officials, who were focused on defending the pound at all costs, foreign traders were primarily concerned with profit and risk. Many concluded that the government's policies were unsustainable and that the pound was due for a significant devaluation. Among these speculators was George Soros, who had studied the situation carefully and decided that the pound was overvalued and ripe for a major correction. His approach combined both careful analysis and bold action. As he prepared to place massive bets against the currency as the day unfolded, the Bank of England made repeated attempts to defend the pound, using billions of pounds of foreign reserves and raising interest rates in dramatic fashion. Initially, officials believed these measures would restore confidence in the currency and deter speculative attacks. However, the intensity of the selling, combined with the market's perception that the government was acting out of desperation, made these interventions ineffective. By the afternoon, it became clear that the pound could not be defended within the ERM, and Britain was forced to withdraw, allowing the currency to float freely. Black Wednesday thus stands as a historic example of the limits of government intervention in financial markets, illustrating how structural economic weaknesses, when combined with market speculation, can produce rapid and dramatic outcomes. The day not only caused immediate financial losses for Britain, but also reshaped global perceptions of currency stability and demonstrated the extraordinary power that skilled investors like Soros could wield in influencing national economies.